Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is National Master Ralph Tan, and welcome to Beginner's Breakdown. Today, we're going to take a dive into the concepts of pins, how we can create pins and utilize pins to the maximum advantage. So let's take a look at this position between Bakau versus Sinaju in 1983. So first things first, what is a pin? So a pin is a tactic where we can use a piece to attack another piece, an opposing piece, and that piece can't move at all, otherwise the piece behind it will be in danger. And typically the piece that's behind it is either higher of value or unprotected. So let's evaluate this position here. So it is black to move. So black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns as well. So both sides are equivalent pawn-wise. Both sides respectively have their queen and the rook pair. So looks like both sides are equivalent in material. And I would say both sides for their kings are relatively safe. So let's see if we have a pin in this position. So what we can notice here is that our rook on A2 is pinning this rook on C2 towards the queen. So this rook on C2 can't move at all, otherwise the queen would be in danger. So for example, let's just make a random move. If the rook ever moves away, then the queen would be captured by the rook. So since we have this pin, we want to try to utilize it and make the most of it. So whenever we have a pin, we want to bring more pressure into the pin piece. So the rook is the pin piece, and our attackers are the rook on A2 and our queen on E5. So we have two attackers, and for white, they have two defenders on the C2 rook. So the defenders will win. So if rook captures, queen, rook, and it's equivalent. So how could we possibly put more pressure onto the C2 rook? So a lot of us are saying in chat that rook to C3 is our move. And with rook to C3, this rook is now putting more pressure onto this rook on C2. So we have 1, 2, 3 attackers in total, while white has 2 defenders. Now after this move rook to C3, it looks like white has a couple options here. They could either take this rook on C3 or take the rook on A2. Now if they take the rook on C3, now this rook on A2 is open to capturing this queen on E2, and we would be up material. However, if white captures the rook on A2, that means this rook on C1 is undefended. So we had another pin alongside the C file. So after rook takes A2, rook takes C1 with a check. If the king moves away to H2, then we could deliver mate by either queen to H1 checkmate or rook to H1 checkmate. And there's no other good moves, just white blocks with the queen. Then we could capture the queen, and after king takes, we can deliver the move queen to B1, forking the king and rook, winning even more material. So king G2, queen takes A2. So let's do some practice. How about this position with Donner versus Huebner in 1968, and it is black to move. So let's evaluate the position. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So white is up pawn-wise, up by 2 pawns, and both sides have a queen and a rook. Okay, and both sides, I would say, are relatively safe with their kings. And what we can notice here in this position is that we have already a pin here along the B6 to G1 diagonal. So the queen is pinning the queen on C5 to the king on G1. So this queen on G5 can't move anywhere, otherwise the queen on B6 will be attacking the king on B1. So what could we do to fully utilize and maximize our advantage alongside this pin that we have? How could we put more pressure onto the queen on c5? Perfect. A lot of us are saying the move rook to c8. And now with the move rook to c8, it is attacking the queen on c5. So originally before rook c8, the queens were looking at each other. So we have one attacker on the queen on c5 while white has one defender. So white would live after this exchange happens. But after rook to c8, we are now threatening to attack the queen. So if a move like pawn to b4, then we can just simply capture the queen with our rook and we would win material here. But now the question is, what happens after the queen takes our queen on b6? If we naively capture the queen back, looks like our rook on c8 is undefended. So they can take their rook on c1 and capture our rook and they would be up material. So in this case, what we want to do is create a little intermediate move, an in-between move. So instead of making the obvious move of capturing our queen back, we want to play rook takes c1 with a check. So since white is in check, they have to react to it. So with this check in mind, the white king would have to go to f2, and now we can capture the queen on b6, and we are up a whole rook. Perfect. All right, let's take a look at this example. We have Shumov versus Winawer in 1875, and it is white to move here. So first things first, let's always evaluate the position. So white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3. So looks like we are up 2 pawns as white. Perfect. Both sides have their rook pairs and both sides have a queen, but it looks like in compensation for our 2 pawns, black has a bishop for it. And what we can also notice is that we have a pin set in place. So this queen on a4 is pinning this queen on c6 towards the king on e8. So this queen cannot move to any other square, let's say c5, otherwise the king on e8 would be in danger. And in addition, our queen on a4 is unprotected. So if we don't react properly, then I believe they can capture our queen on a4 for free. So what could we possibly do here in this position? So since we have this pin along a4 to e8, we want to put more pressure onto this queen on c6. And the move is rook to c1. And as we play rook to c1, now we're bringing this rook to attack the queen. So we have 2 attackers in total, the rook on c1 and the queen on a4. And black only has 1 defender, the rook on c8. But after rook to c1, it looks like black could capture our queen on a4. But fortunately for us, we can take our rook on c1 and capture the rook on c8, delivering checkmate. So we have our classic ladder mate with both the rooks on b7 and c8 controlling both ranks. Excellent. All right, how about this one here? So we have Rusenblatt versus Wolk in 1977, and it is white to move. So it's always good to evaluate the position first. So white has 1, 2 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3 pawns. So black is up 1 pawn. Both sides respectively have a rook and dark square bishops here. So in this position, we can notice that we have a pin set in place with our bishop pinning this bishop on e5 towards the king on h8. So this bishop can't move to any other squares like d6, otherwise the king would be in danger. But as we have this pin, we can't necessarily capture this bishop, otherwise black will simply capture back with their rook and they'll be perfectly fine. So what could we do to maybe utilize and take advantage of this pin here? Perfect. We have the move rook to b8. Now with rook to b8, we are bringing another pin into this position. So if black captures our bishop on d4, then what we can do is capture this rook on e8 with a check. And now, once the king moves away, then we can take our pawn on c3 and capture the bishop on d4. Now, what happens if the rook on e8 captures our rook on b8, since it's completely undefended? Well, if the rook captures our rook on b8, then we can take our bishop on d4 and capture the bishop on e5 because it is no longer protected by the rook. We have deflected the rook away. So when bishop takes e5, it not only attacks the king, it also attacks the rook. So after the king moves to b8, then g8, then we can take our bishop and capture the rook on b8. And we would simply win material. Excellent. All right, how about this position? We have Perk versus Stoltz in 1931 as black to move. So this position has a little bit of a twist. It's more than a one move combination here. So it's always good to evaluate the position. So black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. So black is up a pawn. Both sides have a rook. Both sides have a queen. And in compensation here, white has 2 minor pieces for our rook. So they are up the material. So what we can notice here is that we have our rook on e8 pinning this pawn on e3. And it's a pin because this pawn cannot capture as it usually would, otherwise the king on e1 would be in danger. And in addition, we do also have another tactic up our sleeve, which is either the move queen to a1 check or queen to c1 check. And it would be a skewer because if the king moves away, then our rook on h1 would be captured. But unfortunately here, after queen to c1, there's the move knight to d1 to interfere to check. And after queen to a1, there is also the move knight to b1 or knight to d1 to stop the check. So how do we fully utilize this pin and to our fullest advantage? How do we put pressure onto this pawn on e3? So excellent. I see a lot of us in chat saying pawn to d4. Pawn to d4 is a perfect move because this pawn on e3 can't capture this pawn on d4. And this knight, if it moves away, then this queen on d3 is completely unprotected. So our queen on a3 will capture the queen on d3 for free. So we also have another pin set in place. But now the big question is, what happens if white just simply captures the pawn on d4 with our queen? Now we can set in place what we had earlier before. And that would be the move queen to a1, delivering a skewer along the first rank. So if the king moves away, let's say to e2 or d2, either one, doesn't matter, then we can take our queen on a1 all the way to the other side of the board and capture the rook on h1. Now, if white tries to block the check with a knight on d1, then we could actually capture this queen on d4. And unfortunately for white, this pawn on e3 can't take back on d4 because I have a rook on e8 pinning the pawn on e3. And last but not least, if white tries to interpose the check with a move like queen d1, then that leaves this knight on c3 completely undefended, so we can capture the knight and we would be up the exchange. Rook for bishop. Excellent. All right, how about we try this position? We have Kasparov versus Browne in 1979, and it is a white to move. So let's evaluate the position. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns as well. So both sides are equivalent pawn-wise. Both sides have a queen, both sides have a rook, and both sides also have their light square bishops. So in this position, we actually don't have a pin in this position. So what we need to do is create a pin. So how would we want to create a pin? Well, we want to take a look at where our pieces are placed and how we can use that to our advantage. So specifically, this rook on a7. And a typical pattern that is good principle for rooks is that they love open files because they can move freely up and down, and in addition they love the 7th rank because that's where all the pawns originate, and if given the chance, white can take the rook and capture the pawns. And with this in mind, maybe we could line up some pieces together of black and then utilize that pin. So perfect. I see a lot of us in chat saying to move bishop to h7 with a check. So it looks like we are voluntarily giving our bishop away. But with this bishop on h7, if the black king takes our bishop, bam, we have a pin along the 7th rank. So that means this pawn on f7 can't move at all. So it can't push forward, or it can no longer really defend this bishop on e6. And with that in mind, we can take our queen on e5 and capture the bishop on e6. And the pawn can't capture the queen because of this rook on a7. And now with this in mind, black is actually suffering here. So let's say if black tries to continue with pawn takes b2 with the threat of promoting next move, what we can simply do is just capture the pawn on f7 with the queen, and after the king runs away to the corner in h8, then we can deliver checkmate with either queen to g7 or queen to h7. Excellent. So creating and utilizing pins in this situation. And in addition, if the black king does ignore the bishop on h7 and let's say moves along to f8, then unfortunately that ends the game on the spot, as the queen on e5 can slide over to the corner on h8 and deliver checkmate, as it guards the 8th rank, pawn guards e7, and the queen also guards the g7 square. Perfect. How about this position? So we have Hansen versus Mueller in 1962, and it is black to move here. So let's evaluate the position. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns, okay. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns as well. So both sides are equivalent pawn-wise. Both sides have a rook, but the imbalance here is that white has a rook for our bishop. So they are up the exchange here. So in this position, we don't really have a pin set in place. So we're going to need to create a pin and then start utilizing it for our advantage here. So we can also notice that we have a lot of pressure onto this g2 pawn. We have the rook on g8 attacking it, pawn attacking it, and in addition, this bishop attacking the pawn as well. So that's 3 attackers in total, while white only has 1 and 2 defenders on the pawn. So the rook on d2 and the king on h1. So maybe the move includes or hints at taking this pawn on g2. But the question is, what do we do after we capture on d2? So let's just take a look with pawn takes, as it's very pleasing to the eye because it's 1 square away from promotion. But after king to g1, I believe we are hitting a bit of a stump here for black because there's nothing really we can do furthermore, because our bishop is on a light square and the king is on a dark square. and we can't necessarily bring our rook to the first rank in a properly fashion. So it seems to be that rook takes g2 is in the move. So rook takes g2. If the rook captures back on g2, we somewhat have a pin here. Our bishop is lining up towards the rook on g2 and the king on h1, but it's not a true pin yet because there is this pawn on f3. So we're gonna have to get rid of the pawn. If we just capture the rook, we're kind of just stuck here as black. So the move here is just simply ignoring the rook and just pushing the pawn up. And with pushing the pawn to f2, our bishop on e4 is pinning the rook on g2 to the king on h1. So the rook can't move at all, so it can't capture the pawn on f2, otherwise the bishop would be attacking the king. And white really has nothing to stop our pawn from promoting, so promotion is inevitable here. So let's just say, for example, if white just continues with capturing on b5, then we can just promote to a queen, and after the king moves away, then we can deliver checkmate with queen takes g2, supported by the bishop on e4. So that's what happens if the rook takes, but let's just say white just tries to ignore the threat on g2 and just simply moves back to the first rank with rook to d1. So we still want to utilize this advantage of our bishop being lined up towards the king on h1. So what we can do here is pretty much follow the same idea of just pushing this pawn to f2. And white is in big trouble because there is a discovery check here. So let's say, for example, if rook to f1 to kind of stop the pawn from promoting, we just have rook to g1 check. So it is a double check and a discovery check. So after the king moves away, we capture the rook, and mate is right around the corner. So whatever white does, let's say they capture on b5, then we just play rook to h1, checkmate. Perfect, we are on a roll. All right, how about we try this position? We have Hemsov versus Weber in 1973, and it is white to move here. So first things first, we should always evaluate the position. So white has 1, 2, 3 pawns. Black also has 1, 2, 3 pawns as well. Both sides have a queen, both sides have a rook, and both sides also, in addition, have the bishop here. So it is white to move here, and through evaluation here, we don't really have a pin set in place. So looks like we're gonna have to create a pin and then utilize it to our maximum advantage here. But we can also notice, if we put ourselves in black's shoes, then we can see that black has a couple pins on us. Our bishop on g1 can't move, otherwise the queen would be attacking the king on h1, and our pawn on h2 can't really capture anything that's on g3 because the king would be in danger. And also, in addition, there is this nice little idea where if white is a bit careless, then there's this move, rook takes h2 check, and after the king takes, the queen can slide all over to h5, and after the king moves, then black can just pick up the rook and simply be winning more material. So we're going to have to react in a proper manner here. So white to move. And in addition, we can notice that a lot of our pieces are kind of aimed towards the opposing king. So our queen, bishop, rook, they're in action. They're ready to attack the king. So in chat, we have the move rook to g8. Lovely first move. So we are making an active move. We are delivering a check, and black has to react to a check. So whenever a king is in check, they can either block the check, capture the piece that's checking the king, or move away. So black can't really capture g8. If black blocks with bishop to c8, then we have a pin here, but after this, we can just end the game here and there with queen to b6, checkmate, as our bishop covers a8 and the queen attacks the king and takes away its remaining safe squares. So it looks like the king has to move away. So king to a7 is the move here for black. So what could we do here after this position? So what we can notice is that we have a light square bishop that's in action, and we want to kind of lure the king into a light square and take advantage of that. So the move here that we want to try to look for is this sly little move, rook to a8. So we are giving up our rook, but in compensation, we will be winning the game. So if the bishop captures the rook on a8, we have this move, queen to c7 with a check. And black's only move is to block with the bishop. And after the bishop blocks, then we can take our queen on c7 and capture the bishop on b7, delivering mate, as it's supported by our bishop on d5. Now, what happens if the black king takes on a8? Well, after the black king takes the rook, we have our theme for today, the pin. So this bishop can't move to a square like c8, otherwise this bishop on d5 will be attacking the king on a8. But now, how could we apply pressure and attack and utilize this pin that we have going alongside d5 to the a8 diagonal? So the move here is queen takes a6 with a check. And after queen takes a6 with a check, the black bishop cannot take the queen on a6 because this bishop on d4 would be attacking the king on a8. And once the king simply slides on over, then we can end the game here and there by capturing the bishop on b7 with our queen. And it is checkmate as it's supported by our bishop on d5. All right, how about we take a look at this position? So we have two unknown players in 1949, and it is black to move here. So always a good thing to evaluate the position. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns. So white is up pawn-wise by 2, and both sides have a queen and both sides have a rook. So we can also notice that in this position, white is dominating the 7th rank. They have a battery. So a battery is when two or more pieces are working together to control a file, rank, or diagonal. And in this case, the queen and rook are just dominating the 7th rank. And it is attacking our queen on d7. So it looks like we are in a little bit of trouble here. And we don't have a pin here as black. So we're going to need to create one and then utilize it to our advantage here. So we can also notice that in this position, the white king on g1 is in a little bit of trouble because it doesn't really have too much air to breathe. There's pawns in its way, and its only safe squares are h1 and f1. So white has a back rank problem. So maybe we could try to bring one of our pieces, either the queen or the rook, to the last rank to deliver the idea of checkmate. So we have, so there is that idea that this rook on c7 is pinned, because if the rook moves away, then the queen on b7 would be in danger. So theoretically a pin. So a lot of us in chat are also saying this move, rook to c5. Very, very nice. Now rook to c5 looks like all of our pieces are on pre. So that means a lot of our pieces are hanging. That means white could probably just take them. Well, let's take a look at white's options here. White could maybe take the queen on d7. They could take on c5 with either the pawn or rook. Let's take a look at each one of them. So if the rook on c7 captures our queen on d7, then we can deliver checkmate in one as we bring our rook from c5 to c1, taking away all the squares of the king and attacking the king. All right, and if the rook takes, then we use our theoretical pin with queen d7 capturing the queen on b7 as the rook is no longer in the way of us attacking. And if white captures our rook with the pawn on d4, then what we can do is bring our queen on d7, bring it all the way up towards the other side of the board, and deliver checkmate on d1 as it attacks the king and takes away f1 and h1. And if white does anything else, there's just too much pressure onto the c7 rook with two attackers and one defender. So let's just say here and now and then, white tries to make some breathing air for the king. We can just simply capture the rook and we'll be up a lot of material. All right, we are looking good here. All right, how about we try this position? We have Lehmann versus Mueller in 1952, and it is white to move here. So white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So black is up 2 pawns. Both sides have a queen. Both sides also have their rooks. And both sides also have a dark square bishop. What we can notice here in this position is that our king is very safe as it's castled. So we followed the opening principles pretty well. Unlike for black, their king is still stuck in the center, and the center is where all the action happens. So danger is lurking for black. And we do have a pin in this position. Our queen on a4 is pinning this queen on d7 to the king on e8. So this queen cannot move to any squares like c7, otherwise the king on e8 would be in danger. And in addition to this pin, our queen on a4 is unprotected. So if we are careless, let's say we make a pawn move, they're just going to capture our queen on a4 completely for free. But how could we utilize this pin and put pressure onto this queen on d7? So how could we bring more attackers onto the d7 queen? So if we notice here, we have a rook on d1. And this rook on d1 is on the same file as the queen on d7. So we can take our rook on d1 and simply capture the pawn on d5. Now it looks like it is a bit of a mistake because our queen on a4 is hanging. But if the queen takes our queen on a4, we can notice that the black king on e8 has absolutely no squares to go to. So our rook on d5 is covering d7 and d8, and our bishop on a3 is covering e7 and f8. So no squares at all. So that means all white needs to do now is deliver the final blow, and in which, in this position, is to move rook to e1 with a check. And now mate is inevitable. All black can do is really just delay the checkmate with a couple blocks. So bishop to e3 blocking, rook takes, queen blocks, and then bam, we have checkmate. And if white does anything, if black does anything else to, let's say, hold on to this queen, let's say, for example, rook to d8, we are not going to capture the queen, though it's still a good move. We win material. We can just continue the same idea of playing rook to e1 check, and after the bishop blocks, then we can take with our rook, delivering checkmate. Excellent. All right, how about we give this position a try? So it is Evans versus Bisguier in 1958, and it is white to move here. So white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns as well. So both sides are equivalent pawn-wise. Both sides have a queen and both sides have a rook and light square bishop respectively. So in this position, we don't have a pin here, so we're going to need to create one. And in addition here, black kind of has a pin on us. So this queen on e6 is attacking the bishop, and our bishop can't move. Otherwise, the piece behind it, the rook on e1, will be in danger. So let's say if we play a careless move like bishop to f3, then they can just capture our rook with checkmate. So that's a big blunder. We don't want to do that. So how could we maybe set up a pin in this situation? You can also notice that this king is really misplaced. It's on f8. The rook can't move at all because the king is blocking its way, and there's this awkward bishop on e8 here. Okay, so we do have a couple of ideas of maybe putting our bishop on c6, because if the queen, let's say, is not there for visualization sakes, let's say queen of g6, we can capture this bishop on e8 with our rook, and it will be supported by our bishop here. But I want to kind of put that in our pocket for the meantime. I want to save that move. I want to build up this position first. Okay, and we also notice, so good brainstorming, that ideas like rook to e3 is just a tad bit too slow, and maybe black can kind of react in preparation for any initiative that white may have. So what we want to try to do is kind of tickle the king on f8 a little bit. So what we're going to do is play the move queen to a3 with a check. And with queen to a3 check, black has two moves here. They can either block the check with queen to e7, or they can slide their king to g8. But if the king goes to g8, it's on a light square now, and we have a light square bishop. So this is the perfect opportunity for us to win some material. So what we can do is create a discovery check / attack, in which bishop takes h7 with a check, so black has to react to it. So after black takes, then our rook on e1 will capture the queen, and we have good compensation, a queen for a rook and a bishop. But now the big question is, what happens if the queen blocks and goes to d7? Now, with the queen on e7, we can pull out our idea that we have in our pocket and now play the move bishop to c6, because this queen on d7 is pinned because our queen on a3 would be attacking the king on f8 if the queen on d7 was not there. So now with this in mind, if black just captures our queen on a3, then we can take our rook on e1, bring it all the way to the other side of the board, and deliver checkmate to the king on f8, as our rook covers the e7 square, attacks the king on f8, and guards g8. And it is very well supported by our bishop on c6. And likewise, if black tries to do anything else, the queen on d7 will fall. So for example, if bishop takes c6, we can take our queen on a3 and just capture the queen on e7, and then mate is right around the corner. So king g8, we can play queen to e8 check, bishop takes e8, and then we deliver the final blow with rook to e8 checkmate. Very nice. How about we give this one? So we're taking it up a notch. This one is a little bit more difficult. So we have Poulsen versus Hansen in 1990, and it is black to move here. So let's evaluate the position. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns as well. So both sides are equivalent pawn-wise, and both sides also have 2 rooks and respectively a dark square bishop. So in this case, we don't necessarily have a pin, so it's our job now to create a pin. And what we can notice here is that the white king on f2 is on a dark square, and our bishop specializes on dark squares. So maybe we could try to use that idea to try to win some material. Use the fact that the king is on a dark square. Maybe we can line up one of white's pieces onto a dark square and then use our bishop to win that material. So a very attractive move here in this position would be the move rook takes d4, capturing the bishop, and we are sacrificing here because the rook is worth more than the bishop. But looks like white could capture on d4. And looks like we have a very nice tactic of bishop to b7, creating a pin. So if we really think about this, if white is careless, we can just capture the rook and we are up a minor piece. But if this happens, well, white won't do that because they have the move king to e3. So they're holding onto the rook. So if the bishop captures here, the king takes, and if anything here, we just help the white centralize their king in the endgame, which is not a good idea. And if we try to put pressure onto this rook on d4, let's say with rook to d8, we have 2 attackers now on this rook, and white has 1 defender. White will just simply play rook to d2, and if the next move is given, white will step out the pin and be free. And if we try to just exchange everything off, it's just equivalent, and white is honestly just winning here now, as they'll take the b5 pawn and run their passed pawn down the board. So what we need to do is kind of remove the defender. So we notice that this bishop is the defender of this rook. The bishop is being defended by the rook on e4. So what we want to try to do is kind of scare the rook away. And that move would be pawn to f5. Now with pawn to f5, it is attacking the rook on e4. If the rook, let's say, goes to e3, then it loses the defense of the bishop on d4. So then the rook will just capture, and we have a pretty good game here as black wins material. And if the white rook, let's say, goes to not g4, f4 or h4, we just simply continue to attack the rook with the move pawn to g5, and our pawns are just dominating these squares. So as the rook moves away, then we can capture the bishop with our rook winning material. But now the main question comes to play is, what happens if white plays the very special move en passant? Now as white en passant here, then I think we can deliver this idea of rook takes d4. And now, as the rook captures back, because white lost material, they should gain it back, we can play bishop to b6 now, pinning this rook on d4. And once white tries to hold on to this rook on d4, with, let's say with either the rook coming to d2 or the king going to e3, now since we've kind of deflected this pawn away, we can simply push our e5 pawn. And now after, let's say white tries to hold on to the rook on d4, then we can just simply capture the rook. And after the king moves away, we successfully won a whole bishop in this position. So we want to try to build up to utilize our pin sometimes. All right, let's do one more of these, and then we'll take a look at a very special game that includes pins. So in this position, we have Stahlberg versus Najdorf in 1947, and it is white to move here. So white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. So white is up a pawn. Both sides have the rooks. Both sides have a queen. And both sides have a bishop. Now in this position, we do not have a pin here. So it looks like we're going to have to create a pin ourselves. And now this position is a little bit tricky because of where all the pieces are placed. And we can't necessarily make an effective move, an effective pin right off the bat. But what we're going to need to do is kind of lure our opponent in here. So a good thing to notice is that we have a light square bishop, and it specializes in the light squares, so it can only go on light squares. We want to maybe take advantage in this position of maybe the light squares that kind of surround the king on g7 here. So could we maybe try to utilize this bishop to set up a pin here? So we do have the idea of bishop to f7. Now it looks like a bit of a crazy move because we are simply putting our bishop on prey, so it's hanging. And in addition, since it's moved out the way, the rook on d8 is now attacking our rook on d2. But if the rook captures on d2, we can just simply capture on g6 because the bishop is now there attacking the pawn on g6 as well. If the king goes to h8, then we have queen to g8 checkmate. And if the king goes to f8, I think queen takes f7 kind of seals the deal here, with the idea of just moving the bishop out the way, creating a discovered attack. And black can't really do a move like queen e7 to propose a queen trade because there is this move, queen to h8, checkmate. But now, let's get on to the critical moment. Instead of taking the rook, can black just capture the bishop on f7? Well, if the king captures on f7, we have successfully set up a pin. So our rook on f3 is attacking this bishop on f6. And this bishop on f6 cannot move away at all. Otherwise, the king behind the bishop would be in danger here. So what we can do now here is actually capture the rook on d8. Bishop can't take, once again, because there's this pin. And if black captures with the queen on d8, then we have this nice tactic of playing queen to b7 with a check, not only attacking the king, but also attacking this rook on a6 that is completely unprotected. So as the king moves away from danger, then we can take our queen onto b7 and capture the rook on a6. and we are up the exchange. We have a rook for their bishop here. And if black tries to do anything else, let's say they try to unpin themselves, then we just get away with taking a whole rook, and we can move away and we'll be up the exchange. Rook for rook, queen for queen, and rook for the bishop. Perfect. Okay, so I think we got a good gist of creating pins and utilizing pins. So how about we take a look at a full game on how Frank Marshall was able to defeat David Janowski using the ideas of pins. So we have David Janowski as black here, as white, and Frank James Marshall's as black. So the game opens up with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to f6, and we have the Russian defense, or the Petrov opening. So white captures on e5, and black pushes the pawn to d6 to scare away the knight on e5. So the knight simply returns back to f3, and now black can safely capture the pawn on e4. There's no ideas of queen e2 trying to skewer the knight to the king, because black simply just plays queen e7 and the day is saved. So white just continues to centralize by placing their pawn on d4, and now this dark square bishop is able to c. So pawn to d5, so black is just fixing the position here, now having more visibility for this bishop to move. And bishop to d3 is played by white. So simply developing, they're one step closer to castling, and now just putting a little bit of pressure onto this knight on e4. Black just continues to develop with bishop to d6, so they're doing the same thing. They are developing and getting ready to castle. The game continued on with pawn to c4, so white's looking for ways to kind of chip away at the center, and black now just delivers the check with bishop to b4. And now, instead of blocking the check, let's say knight to d2 or bishop to d2, Janowski decided to play king to f1. So simply moving alongside with their king, losing castling privileges, but getting away from check. Black simply castles here. The tension is released on d5, so c takes, queen takes, and now queen to c2 is played. So white has created a battery here, so the queen and bishop are working together to control the b1 and h7 diagonal, and also kind of somewhat creating a pin, because if this knight moves away, let's say d6, then this bishop on d3 can capture the pawn on h7. So hence why black just simply supported the knight on e4 by playing rook to e8. And now white makes a bit of a fatal mistake and plays the move knight to c3. And it looks very innocent because white's just following opening principles and developing, but unfortunately here, black can just capture this knight. And after white captures back, there's this very nice idea of sacrificing the queen on f3. So queen on d5 capturing the knight on f3. And the reason why this move is very good is because after the pawn takes on f3, then our bishop on c8 will slide all the way over to h3, attacking the king, forcing the king to go to g1, and then we can bring our rook to e1, and after white delays checkmate with bishop to f1, then rook takes bishop, checkmate. So white cannot capture the queen on f3. So c takes b4 is played by white here. And black is in no worry. Black is not going to move their queen because the threat still renews and just develops with knight to c6. Now white continues by playing the move bishop to b2, simply developing, and now g takes f3 is now prevalent in this position. Now black could always move their queen away, let's say queen to h5 and defending h7, but black decides just to capture on b4. And as the knight captures on b4, essentially what black is trying to say is that if you take my queen, I will take your queen. Once you capture back, I will deliver a check on h3, and as the king goes on h1, I'm going to play this move rook to e2 and deliver a skewer. So hence why in this position, white just decides just to capture the pawn on h7. A pawn's a pawn, and it's with a check. So black has to move away, and then and now, white captures the queen on f3. Bishop to h3 check is played first, so an intermediate move, an in-between move. And that forces the king to go to g1, and then knight takes c2 is played, bishop takes c2, and then rook to e2. We have our skewer. And it looks like white can defend the bishop on c2 and stay up the material, but what black can do is finally bring all the pieces into work by taking the rook on a8 and moving it to e8, creating a battery. So these two rooks are dominating the open e file. And if white is careless, let's say they push a pawn, there is this idea of rook to e1 check, rook takes, and rook takes checkmate. So in the game, bishop to c3 is played, and now black now plays the move rook 8 to e3. So there is this idea of a pin, because if this pawn takes our rook on f3, then black has this move rook to g2 check. After the king moves to its only square f1, we can take our rook and capture g2, and it's a check. So if the king goes to g1 or e1, doesn't really matter. Both rooks are going to fall for white. So king e1, rook takes c1 check, king moves out the way, then rook takes h1. So that's why in the game, white did not capture, but played the move bishop to b4. But now, since this rook is on e3, it can capture this pawn on f3, which does happen. But it looks like both rooks are lined up on the light squares. And white has this move bishop to d1 to skewer the rooks. So if one rook moves away, the other one falls. But fortunately here, black just simply plays the move rook to f6, and Janowski throws in the towel, because if the bishop captures the rook on e2, then we have rook to g6 check. If bishop blocks on g4, rook takes g4 checkmate. And if white, let's say, holds on a little bit, or maybe tries to play a move like pawn to f4, there still renews this threat of rook takes g6. So today we looked at pins on how we can create them and utilize them to our maximum advantage. So thank you all for tuning in. My name is National Master Ralph Tan, and that is Beginner's Breakdown.